It's a real pleasure to welcome all you. I'm really thankful to see so many people joining this event, Policies for Agroecology, organized by the Transformative Partnership Platform, the TPP. So we had so many registration that we had to buy another Zoom version, a stronger Zoom version to accommodate everybody. This number is incredible, and it shows that the momentum for agroecological transformation of agriculture is very strong. With the upcoming UN Food Summit, Food System Summit in the coming weeks, it's getting stronger every week. The momentum comes from everywhere. Civil society, academia, policy, countries, professionals. But what we know is that for this transformation, the interactions between science and policymakers are a crucial ingredient for this. And this is precisely one of the two ambitions of the TPP. Science and policy are two different worlds with their own rules, with their own diversified set of actors, own rhythm, but they are bound to work together more and better to make this transformation happen. This event today will focus especially on the scientific analysis that research can provide on public policy. How to assess public policy in their capacities to promote or hamper this agroecological transformation. What analytical framework could science propose to assess public action on food systems in the wide diversity of contexts, scales, and around the world? This event will feature a presentation of a background paper that has been drafted for this event, especially with a proposition of an analytical framework. This is available on the site, as well as the executive summary of this background paper. And there will be also a presentation of the ongoing TAF project, a research project on public policies. After illustration of some case studies in countries, there will be two panels of discussion, one with scientists, another with different stakeholders, with 2 times of interaction with the audience. And the moderation will be provided by Vincent Gitz from CIFOR, and I thank him for him. I have few technical recommendations for this event. It's going to be a very dense event, and we really ask all the presenters and panelists to respect the time they were given, and Vincent will ring the small bell 1 minute before the end of each sequence. There is interpretation in 3 languages, English, French, and Spanish. You can select either the floor on your screen or your preferred listening language. There is a button lower part of the screen where you can choose your language you want to hear the translation, the interpretation. This event, as you know, will be recorded for public ongoing after this event for posting on YouTube, etc. There will be a Q&A window and attendees can pose their question in these windows. If you can indicate to whom this question is directed, when it's pertinent, it will help us. Answer will be provided either in writing by the panelists online or be selected to be posed in public during the event. You can vote for each question with a thumbs up in the question and answer screen. So each time you vote for a question, it goes up in the ranking and might be selected easily. Given the time frame, as I said, it's very tight. There won't be any question addressed online, live. And so there will be a selection of questions addressed during the audience interaction, but we have planned to answer all the questions as a capital of interaction in writing after the event by email to the participants. There will be a consultation on the background paper, an electronic consultation for 5 or 6 weeks after the event, and I will give the modalities of the interaction, reaction from the public on this background paper at the end of this event. The link to this background paper, as well as the executive summary, was given with the Zoom link when you registered. So we don't have time to give a detailed bio of each panelist, but it's online on the event site. And so I'll give the floor now to Vincent to start the event and moderating the event. Thank you, everybody, and have a very good event.
Thank you very much, Etienne, and welcome everybody. Buenos dias, bon dia, bonjour. And without further ado, I will give the floor to the person who is together with Etienne, Ainzelin, the co-convener, the other co-convener of the Transformative Partnership Platform on Agroecology, and also chief scientist at World Agroforestry and CIFOR, Fergus Sinclair. Fergus, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Vincent. I hope my slides... I'm going to just give you a very brief introduction to the working of the Transformative Partnership Platform on agroecological approaches to building resilience of livelihoods and landscapes. Next slide, please. Now, this emerged last year during 2020, following a whole set of fora and reports during 2019, including the high-level panel of experts of the Committee on World Food Security report on agroecological and other innovative approaches to food security and nutrition, and the Global Commission on Adaptation report on agroecological approaches to realizing climate resilient agriculture, and a process between the French research institutes and the CGIR, the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, to look into agroecology, and a call for action that resulted from next slide.
All right, thank you.
So it's a demand-driven coalition of willing participants addressing key knowledge and implementation gaps that are constraining agroecological conditions. It uses the 13 principles of agroecology that were articulated in the HLP report, and those incorporate the 10 FAO elements of agroecology that are internationally agreed. But because they're explicit statements, they're clearer in terms of guiding action. And these are related to transition levels. And next slide, please. Which are different depending where you're starting from and the context within which intensification happens. So a lot of people are very familiar with the Gleesman transition levels, which are in the previous slide. And these are looking at going from an industrial agriculture or a green revolution type of agriculture, where a lot of inputs are being used, towards more a redesign to more agroecological systems that use less environmentally disruptive chemicals and move away from monoculture to more agro-biodiverse situations. But there are lots of other transition pathways, and particularly in much of sub-Saharan Africa, we're in a situation where people are not often using very much in the way of inputs, and so it's an agroecological intensification, leapfrogging to higher productivity using natural mechanisms like biological nitrogen fixation and so on, rather than a conventional green revolution model. And the intensification in general tends to be in relation to knowledge and labor, as opposed to conventional agriculture, which tends to intensify in relation to capital. And it intends to use more biodiversity. Next slide, please. So the TPP has 8 working domains where we've identified key issues that are constraining agroecological transition, socioeconomic viability, and there's a French-funded project looking at that across Africa, a common protocol for looking at how practices impact households. There's a global trial of agroecological control of fall armyworm under pests and diseases. We're just starting an EU-funded work on developing agricultural performance metrics, holistic agricultural performance metrics. Policy is the subject today, and we also have nutrition, water management, soil health, and the linkages between diversity and resilience. And please join the web platform and get involved in those.
Okay, then we're done. Then Fergus, the floor is still yours to eventually conclude.
Yes, no, so the conclusion is that this is a demand-driven process whereby the various case study groups that we have and the engagement landscapes that we're working at around the world are driving the agenda that we then take up and move on with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fergus and Etienne, for this introduction and the context on the TPP and what it does and its ambitious. And without further ado, let's get into the topic of today. And as an introduction, Frank Place, who is Director of the Policies, Institutions and Markets CGIAR Research Program, together with Paulo Niederle, who is Professor of Agri-Food Studies and Economic Sociology at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil. You have, both of you, 17 minutes, yes.
No, 10 minutes.
10 minutes, sorry, 10 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, thank you very much, Vincent. Yeah, so along with Paulo, we will present a brief overview of the paper that has been shared with all of you on agroecologically conducive policies, a review of recent advances and remaining challenges. Next slide, please. Yes, the rationale I think has been already kind of given already by Etienne and Fergus, but just to recap, there is increasing agreement on the need for food systems transformations, which are in line very much with the principles of agroecology. As Etienne has noted, there's much momentum at global all the way through to the local levels for reforms involving many different groups and across different farming systems and in different countries of different levels of agriculture transformation. And while there has been progress on identification of the needs for wider scale adoption of agroecology, there has been less discussion on precise policy measures and actions that can be taken. And so this paper is a kind of an attempt to take a first step to filling that gap. Next slide, please. Briefly, the methodology, if you have seen the paper, we set out to identify the types of specific policy measures that can have a significant effect on the application of the agroecological principles that Fergus has highlighted, and to provide examples of actual policy measures that have been taken by regional, national, or local governments. We also aim to try to review the success of these policy measures, but there was little available evidence, and I'll come back to this topic in a short time. So basically, the methodology we applied two very useful outputs from FAO. One was the Food and Agriculture Policy Decision Analysis Framework that gives a very detailed typology of policies according to producer orientation, consumer orientation, or macro and trade. And to that, we added on some insights from the HLP food system framework, which also talks about markets and food environment. And that helped us to try to classify and group the different policies that we took for presentation in the paper. To fill out the framework, we used expert knowledge amongst our group. We relied heavily on the FAO Agroecology Lex database and reviewed literature to fill in these examples. And as you will see, we made an initial start, but it's not comprehensive by any means, and we welcome contributions, and Etienne will come back to this at the end of the program. So next slide, please. Just some high-level findings. So a few countries have put forward policies or strategies that specifically aim to foster a wider practice of agroecology principles. We have France, Brazil, Nicaragua, Senegal is another one. There's a few other countries. But many more countries, although not explicitly referring to agroecology, have enacted policies that really align well with one or more of the agroecology principles. And we have many examples of those in the paper. Some of the other kind of lessons is that, you know, there's not many cases where there's a well-integrated strategy for supporting an agroecology principle. It's often, you know, different ad hoc policies that are in place, and the ability to maintain high levels of commitment to these policies and programs and investments over time have been proved to be challenging. And in addition, policies that inhibit the practice of agroecology often remain in place at the same time, such as high subsidies on fertilizers. Next slide, please. So the next 3 slides, and I'm going to just show them very briefly. You can go back to the previous one, but I have 3 slides of sort of detailed policy measures on consumer-oriented policies and producer and then market-oriented policies. The left-hand column is just a further subgrouping of those. The middle column gives some examples of the types of policies that can be useful for facilitating agroecology transitions. And the right column is examples in practice of those. So in consumer-oriented ones, of course, the governments can come in with taxes and subsidies, and they have in many cases done so to put taxes on highly processed or non-nutritious foods, for example. All countries have some form of nutritional or health information campaigns and programs, whether they're on the media or labeling programs, and they just can vary in the degree of comprehensiveness. So next slide. We have a lot of examples of producer-oriented policies in the paper, possibly partly because of the framework we use, but also because many of the agroecology principles actually relate to production practices. So there's many examples that we've looked at in the paper, from looking at subsidies on inputs, also looking at regulations of those, improving the information dissemination on agroecology principles through extension systems, looking at longer term finance as examples. And there's quite a few on the right-hand column of policies in place and new ones coming on board. And maybe I'll just skip the natural resource management one so we can get to the next slide before I have to close. So on market 2, we looked at a variety of different issues on direct market participation. That's where governments can come in and be a market actor themselves, and procurement's a good example of that, where they can buy foods directly from producers for reserves, or buy foods to furnish for meals for public institutions. And how they set those up can really have an effect on providing incentives for agroecology practices. If we skip down to the last one on catalyzing new markets, yeah, there's important developments to be made still on ecosystem services, to which agroecology can contribute greatly to, providing organic nutrient inputs that agroecology systems need. And the next slide, please. So my last slide before handing to Paulo is that an important issue is really to, before we promote policies, we need to know, well, are they effective in fostering a transition to agroecology? And the short answer is we don't know, because there's not a lot of evidence on that. But we did uncover a lot of relevant literature that can help us to also look at that issue. And so there's been a lot of studies in Europe, in countries and in the US, for example, about previous agricultural policies and their effects on environmental outcomes, the ones that agroecology aspires to as well, like biodiversity and better soil conservation. And generally, they looked at across different types of policies, whether they're just related to sensitization, incentivizing behavior, or command and control, and find generally that command and control ones have been more effective, although there's challenges in the use and implementation of all of these types of policies. And with that, I will pass it over to Paulo to conclude.
Thanks, Frank. Hello, everybody. Please, next slide. So I'm here for a few supplementary points in this first effort to analyze policy supporting agroecological transition processes. In addition to the identifying different categories of policies, 2 aspects catch our attention. The first is associated with the predominance of a logic that, recognizing the multidimensionality of agroecology, works, let's say, to embed agroecology in all policies, instead of bet all chips in a single unified program. The second aspect concerns the idea that the institutional flexibility is required to adapt policy instruments to different social and ecological contexts. And both aspects oblige analysis to go beyond isolated policies and even the formal aspects of the formulation of these policies to understand the dimensions related to coherence, coordination, and governance of the policies. And these are dimensions that become central to the assessment of policy outcomes. And associated with this emerged a concern about policy translation processes during their implementation, including here issues related to the role of the so-called street-level bureaucrats or civil society organizations in adapting policy instruments to different social and ecological realities, what generates unintended effects that analysis about these public policies often pays little attention to. And next and last slide, please. Next slide, please. So just to conclude, this initial analysis we have been working on shows that agroecology as a set of principles has offered different routes of transitions to sustainable and healthy agri-food systems. As Frank has just said, until now, only a few countries have made this move to design a broad set of policies supporting agroecological transitions. But in the literature, we can see that several countries have already put in place significant policy measures in support of such transitions that address directly or indirectly one or more of the agroecological principles. The problem is that up to now, we have only a few yet inspiring localized studies about the effectiveness of these policies. So besides, most of these studies focus only in those countries and territories where agroecology is seen as an alternative to industrial agri-food systems. Even rarer is to find analysis about policies supporting agroecological transitions in those contexts where changing from these industrial agri-food systems is not the main issue. And this is a quite important point we want to discuss in this effort to produce analysis about how public policies are supporting agroecological transitions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulo, and thank you, Frank. There is a link to the background paper, a short link in the chat for those who want to access it. Thanks for this presentation. We are indeed at the start of a big agenda from research to implementation. Thanks for pointing to the questions ahead. I hope we can discuss some of these right today. Arlen Alpha is Senior Research Fellow at CIRAD, and together with colleague Stéphane Guénaud, I think the floor is yours to complement this initial presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vincent, and good afternoon, everyone. So yes, Stéphane and I will now present a proposal for a research action project named STAFS, Transition to Agroecological Food Systems, a case for policy support. So this proposal is the result of a collective effort from more than 30 researchers, part of 5 CIRAD platforms in partnership. We call them DP, 3 CGR centers, and 1 international NGO, BioVision. The ambition of the proposal is to work in a wide diversity of situations in 11 countries. So Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal, Madagascar, South Africa, Laos, Vietnam, India, Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia. The proposal deals with a critical issue for scaling up agroecological initiatives, the need of strong and appropriate public policies. This proposal is not fully funded yet, and we do hope that this event will raise attention and interest for such proposal. Next slide, please. Though public policies are essential drivers in supporting transition to agroecological food systems, most research projects focus on assessment of agroecological practices at the farm level. There is no generic framework to analyze how public policies might facilitate or hamper the agroecological transition. So the objective of TAFs is to engage with policymakers and stakeholders and to provide them with convincing arguments grounded on new evidence and concrete experiences about adapted ways of promoting the necessary transitions through public policies at different levels. Of course, each studied country is unique and is facing specific issues, for instance, from the need to reduce the use of agrochemicals in Vietnam, to strengthen ecological intensification of traditional production systems in Africa, or to scale up scattered agroecological experiences in Brazil. This means there is no one silver bullet solution, and the range of possible policies is very wide. However, all these countries are facing interlinked sustainability challenges in terms of food and nutrition security, decent jobs and incomes, natural resources conservation, and adaptation to climate change that agroecological food systems could contribute to overcome. I will now pass over to Stefan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Arlene. Next slide, please. Yes, so the originality of the proposal is to apply a common rigorous method to assess public policies in such different countries and settings. It starts with a diagnosis of agroecological transition at the national level, which aims to identify the degree of institutionalization of these transitions. Then it continues with a diagnosis of food systems linked to agroecological practices in selected territories. The third step is a co-construction with the stakeholders of the territories of scenarios towards food systems based on agroecology. Then an important step will be the production of evidences on the performance of agroecological food system on employment, natural resource management, and the supply of sufficient, affordable, diversified, nutritious, and healthy food. The fifth step is the common identification of the paths and concrete actions to be implemented in order to move from current performance towards desirable futures of agroecological food systems. Finally, some policy dialogue activities will be developed to formulate concrete policy instruments with the stakeholders and decision makers at the territorial and national levels. Next slide, please. To conclude with expected results, in addition to generating new knowledge as one of the outputs, the proposal is firmly action-oriented and participatory, engaging with stakeholders and policymakers to use narratives, fuel policy dialogue, and put agroecology on the policy agenda will contribute to changes in public policies and in practices of food systems actors. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Arlene and Stefan, and thanks for pointing that indeed we are at the beginning of a research agenda to help countries and all actors to make progress, of which the background paper and this very event is a bit the inception steps in your arrow step one. So this is why both the background paper features a series of case studies, and that now we would like to hear from some countries who have put in place and have gained a lot of experience in putting in place policies for agroecological transitions. And The first panelist I would like to call, Bernard Huber is Emeritus Senior Scientist at INRAE, Professor at École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, and Chair of the French Commission on International Agricultural Research, and will present on the French case. The floor is yours, Bernard, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Vincent. May I have the first slide, please? So I started my slides in English, and so I have to speak about the French case study. And next slide, please. And then I started to write in English, and then I have a problem with the title of the second slide, because how can we translate clearly loi d'avenir pour l'alimentation, l'agriculture et la forêt? C'est-à-dire qu'en France, la question de l'agroécologie
est dans le cadre. Agroecology is part of a law that was passed in 2014, that's 7 years ago. It's actually called the Law of the Future for Agriculture and Forest. It's basically about how to produce differently. It is a law that promotes agriculture and agroecology, where we have 3 key points: progress at the economic front, ecological front, and the social front. It also calls for a stronger engagement in favor of agricultural research that would bring about transformation, and also an assessment of the agroecological system. There is an action plan, 13 key principles, 12 targets, and 6 outputs. So it's a set of activities that we have at the country level. We have all the various government agencies involved. It's also about the establishment of a national committee for the assessment of that policy and its implementation. So there is every year a report that is submitted. Another key term that I would like to share with you, which I would like to actually talk about, but within 5 minutes, I cannot talk about all the 3 elements of the action plan. So I would just talk about one point, which is the experimental farmer. It has been defined through different instruments that we call the collective action. Kindly move to the next slide. So what is it? It's actually one of the key aspects of this new law. It is about promoting the networking and the collective action of various farmers, starting from the grassroots. It is not a network that comes from the top, but it starts from the bottom. So we have what we call the JIEE. Actually, it is an acronym in French, which refers to a group working together for the same economic and environmental targets. In 2021, this year in France, we have up to 1,500 groups covering up to 25,000 farms. That's about 8% of the farmed lands in our country. That's about cooperative, national and regional parks, and various stakeholders in the agricultural industry. This network is part of the law that I have mentioned, which was passed in 2014. It starts at the ground level, at the grassroots level, so it's a bottom-up approach, and we have a sort of intermediation. How does it work? It helps to promote innovation, but also it goes beyond that. When we talk about intermediation, it is a safe place where farmers and non-farmers can come together and share techniques and knowledge. They can support initiation activities as well as support activities to bring about the change that we want in terms of agroecology. So it's a complete change of narrative compared to what has been done over the last 70 years. In a nutshell, that brings about three main results that are very important to talk about a new paradigm for agroecology. First of all, it brings about stronger communities at the regional level. So within regions, you have a stronger partnership. Also, it brings about diversity. We know that in many countries, diversity is not well perceived. But through these networks, we understand that diversity actually is a strength because various people can bring different solutions to protect the land, waters, and various natural resources. For instance, it also helps to better organize farmers in protecting agroecology. Another thing we have to say is it is important to review the various indicators. I mean by that, the performance indicators. Finally, it's also about defining new assessment criteria from a social, economic, and agricultural standpoint. We need to look at all of that together and see how various farms together use and promote the landscape diversity. From one farm to another, the challenges are different. Therefore, it is important to have a general understanding and appreciation. To implement this national policy, we need to have a region-based approach. So in France, we have what we call the préfets, which are the people who are supported by the government to implement this law. In France, we have 13 main regions, and in each of these regions, the project is the law is implemented. Now, we know that there are currently some changes in the agricultural landscape in France. We also have the Green Deal that is to be implemented. And we have a common agricultural policy in France. So all these changes that are currently happening must take into account this new law that I referred to earlier in my presentation. So in a nutshell, this is what I wanted to share from the French perspective. I believe that this new law is really helping us. And I would like to leave you with this message, that agroecology can become a reality only when we join forces with the people at the grassroots level. It brings agroecology will help us to have better quality of life. We need to therefore think in terms of diversity, in terms of grassroots inclusion, and I think that will lead to the best result. Thank you.
Bernard, thank you very much for this presentation. And of course, it's always frustrating. There would be so much more to say, but that's the point. This is why also there's a background paper, and also to know more, we'll have some discussions. We're running a little bit behind, even a lot behind the time. So please appeal to the speakers to keep to their timing. And I will think, unless Senegal, Saliou, can we hear from you now? Do we manage to get the line?
Allô?
Oui, nous vous voyons.
Yes. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Very sorry for the challenges I went through. Yes, they are now loading your PowerPoint presentation, so you can start. I'd like to share with you what we do in terms of agroecology in my country, in Senegal. Next slide. Next slide, please. As you said, from the beginning of this meeting, Senegal, as many other countries in Africa, is faced with degraded landscape. Agriculture is being practiced more and more challenging environments, and therefore that has a negative impact on our production. Therefore, it is important for us to promote a new agricultural system which takes into account the changes and the difficulties. We believe that agroecology is the way to go. It also calls for an enabling environment. And since 2014, we have a national platform for agroecology in Senegal. Further, it is from 2019 with the new development program of Senegal, which is called Senegal Emergent, that the President of the Republic and his government has decided to set agroecology as one of its priorities. Then we have established the DTAS, which brings also about the participation of civil society to promote agroecology in our country. Next slide, please. Now, with the participation of civil society, we have come up with a new network, a network of NGOs and various civil society actors. Think about Farmers Association, the private sector, various NGOs, as well as government agencies. All these actors have decided to put all hands on deck to bring about the agroecological transition in Senegal. So they are part of this platform called DTAS. As I said, you have beyond the actors that I mentioned, international partners and the private sector. Next slide. You may be thinking, what is the mission of that network? The first item is to promote agroecological transition in Senegal through advocacy, awareness raising, experience sharing, as well as supporting various stakeholders of small farmers at the ground level. We hope that we can achieve our target by 2030, which will contribute to the SDGs. In a nutshell, we want to promote agroecology through a partnership with the states and governments. Next slide. How does DTAS function? We have a charter for its implementation and the implementation of the action plan. There is a steering committee which gives the main orientation in the implementation of the defined activities. Next slide, please. Talking about the various policies of DTAS, there are four main policies. First of all, it's about improving the quality of the production areas. As I said, these production areas have been affected and the lands are degraded in some of the main regions of our country. Therefore, it's important to have activities that help to improve the quality of the land. Secondly, we need to improve on the quality of forestry as well as fish farming. Third, we intend to promote agroecology in all the value chains, from the production to the transformation phase. We need to promote agroecology. And finally, the fourth policy has to do with governance and funding the agroecological transition. For all the activities that have been planned, we need to mobilize resources, and therefore all the actors come together to raise the necessary resources for the agroecological transition. Now, what have we done so far since 2019? So far, we can be very proud of our achievements. First of all, we were able to do a good diagnosis of the landscape in all the regions of our country. We have also identified all the various actions. Secondly, we have promoting food security, improving access to farm or farming land for smallholders, providing assistance to smallholders, protecting natural resources, land restoration, have a sustainable management of forestry resources, protect access to animal farming, protecting local agrobiodiversity, make agriculture more resilient in Senegal, and reduce the use of chemical products in agriculture. Finally, promote sustainable consumption in our country. These are basically some of the achievements of the diets. Perhaps you would have to conclude now because we do not have much time. Of course, you can answer some of the questions in the Q&A section. Thank you. This is probably my last slide. Just what I want to say is the government provides some subsidies to smallholders. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you. We are very sorry for interrupting you. We have so many things that we need to say today, and we need to have a certain...
So now our last case study to be presented today is going to be Brazil, because in India is a case study in the background paper, but because he had other commitment, Vijay Kumar from the government of the state of Andhra Pradesh couldn't be with us today, but please look at the paper for India to know more. And now we have the pleasure of hearing from Fernanda Thomas da Rocha, who is Senior Regional Technical Specialist in Rural Institution for Latin America and the Caribbean at IFPRI, and was former Senior Manager at the Brazilian Development Bank, BNDES, and its presentation together with Claudia Oliveira, who is Program Manager of the Environment and Income Program at the Banco do Brasil Foundation. So Fernanda, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes and I'll ring the bell at 4.
Thanks. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. So I work to IFPRI, but today I will be presenting the Ecoforte Redes program in Brazil that I have managed from my previous organization, BNDES, and also together with my colleague Claudia, that's here with us today from Banco do Brasil Foundation. The next slide, please. Let me start with the policy context and the process of construction of this program. In 2012, the federal government of Brazil passed the national policy on agroecology and organic production. And this was a very important step towards the institutionalization of a policy process, a policy framework for agroecology. The Ecoforte program is anchored in this policy framework. It is a federal government program that was financed by the Brazilian Development Development Bank, BNDES, and also the Banco do Brasil Foundation. And it was launched in 2014, and it was the result of a very participatory process where it directly responded to demands and to proposals from civil society organizations that were mainly articulated through the National Articulation of Agroecology, ANA, which is a umbrella national civil society organization, and also the National Commission on Agroecology and Organic Production, which was one of the consultative bodies of the national policy. The Eco Forte-Redes program, then its objective is to support the transition into agroecology of smallholder farmers, family farming. It did it by means of financing territorial-based projects that were managed by family farming organizations themselves. And since 2014, it has been invested more than $10 million. Next slide, please. Yeah, now about the main institutional innovations about this program. Responding to civil society demand, the program was conceived to recognize the key role of the territorialized social dynamics that are important for agroecological construction. Then the main challenge and also the main innovation of the program was to make this concept of territorial agroecology network operation. And what is this about? The idea here was to go beyond only working through family farm single family farmers, producer organizations, and then have this concept of network that bring informal groups, also formal organizations from family farmers that are organized territorially, that interact through participatory dynamics, of a cooperative, associative nature towards the implementation of agroecological production systems and marketing. So these grassroots organizations, they are linked to this more flexible and horizontal process of coordination. Usually we have like a coordinating agency that can be a cooperative, a farmers association, or also an NGO. And this agency has taken on the role of connecting farmers, technicians, and consumers in the territories where the network operates. In the program, this agency also took on the role of being responsible for implementing the project. Besides producer organizations, there were a wide range of organizations that took part of the network. Rural extension, technical assistance, research institutions, public entities, NGOs, consumer groups, private entities. And also, just to highlight that this concept of network, it was not imposed on groups, but it was rather a recognition of the way the groups were organizing themselves. The second innovation was that the program enabled a flexible way of designing the projects by the organization themselves. So the projects had to be organized around the implementation of demonstration units, which would be a place to demonstrate technologies, practice, process methodologies, that included from production to processing and marketing. Then it allowed a wide range of practices and technologies following agroecological principles that responded to the needs of each network in each territory. It was also very intensive in knowledge, in technical assistance, in promoting knowledge sharing between farmers, and in supporting this enlivening process of the networks. Last slide, please. Yeah, in terms of the results, the program has been very successful so far in scaling agroecology. So 42 networks have been supported with more than 700 organizations. They have implemented 1,500 demonstration units and involving more than 36,000 people. In a nutshell, some of the results are diversity of products, rescue of varieties, the strengthening of territorial markets, of short circuits, of also participatory governance process, and this integration of public policies in the territory. My last comment is that the program was very successful in building partnership to expand agroecology, and IFPRI is also one of the partners of the program that has been supporting strongly agroecology in Brazil, not only Brazil but also in other countries through its national level or state level investment projects. And in the case of Brazil, IFPRI has been supporting many of these agroecology networks as well. With this, I finish my presentation. Many thanks.
Many thanks, Fernanda, Tomás da Rocha, and with Claudia Oliveira. Much to say about all these three presentations, about interaction, about also the fact that all these initiatives really give the possibility to stakeholders, to farmers, to influence, to play a role, to take part in policy construction and design at different level. And I guess this is also why the HLPE had proposed the agency as a new pillar for food security and nutrition, a new dimension in its report on agroecology that was discussed at CFS this year, and led to some of the important policy recommendation into which, in fact, the TPP is putting its research agenda into. Now, given the richness of what has been presented, reminding you that please type your questions in the Q&A box. There are already 40 questions there. They will be answered today, and if not, they will be answered in the coming days. So to these panelists, but also now to the next panel, who will show their perspective on these case studies that have been just presented and on the paper. So it's my pleasure now to give the floor to Lev Levido, who is Senior Research Fellow at the Open University in the UK. You have 4 minutes.
Yes, first, market interventions. Agroecological methods have been promoted by policies intervening in market rules, such as regulations, subsidies, and taxes. But market interventions can mean that the dominant corporate actors create adaptations or market niches. And Harriet Friedman theorized this nascent shift as a corporate environmental food regime. This relates to the concept of sustainable intensification, which treats agroecology as extra techniques which are added to a broader toolbox for what aims we should ask. And as the TPP report says, we must understand how the actors translate the initial policy objectives and implement the instruments. This understanding is necessary where agroecology is seen as the alternative to industrial agri-food systems, as well as in those contexts where this is not the main issue. But that contrast describes divergent aims within each country, even within the same agency, more than differences between countries. So priority should be policies strengthening efforts at system change or agroecological transition, whatever we call it, everywhere. And this depends fundamentally on collective capacities. Policies should facilitate the collective capacities of agroecological small-scale or family producers. The producers need several kinds of capacities to share skills and knowledges, such as those known as diálogo de saberes in Latin America, in turn as a basis for participatory guarantee systems, including collective self-certification, organic products, to develop or extend agro-ecosystems, combining traditional or modern scientific knowledge, capacities to develop circuit court through solidaristic democratic decision processes, capacities to strengthen land tenure, including collective forms, thus protecting land as a commons from being turned into private property. Likewise, consumers need capacities to support or organize collective marketing, such as community-supported agriculture. And together, they can jointly facilitate replication of those capacities by more groups across time and space. Such capacities can be identified and strengthened through participatory action research, also mentioned in the report. Now, a little more on short supply chains, which can be understood as proximities as regards the term bringing producers closer to consumers. At least 2 decades ago, some researchers began to analyze these short food chains as an economy of proximity in several senses: organizational, cultural, and geographical, thus potentially extending proximity beyond the locality. Over the past decade, proximity has been linked with solidarity economy initiatives. So we can ask, how do agroecological circuit could extend various forms of proximity, including during the pandemic by digital means as a way to overcome blockages on feiras de agricultor, farmers markets. And how can or do policy frameworks facilitate this process? The answers to that question can help to link policies aimed at producers and consumers in an integrated way. Now, the final point really is on conflicting policy agendas, which are faced by any effort to expand agroecological systems. Over the past decade, so many governments, especially in Latin America, have responded to social movements by adopting support measures for agroecological systems. But in general, the same governments have continued their policies favorable to the dominant agri-food regime, especially for export markets, which thereby undermines agroecological systems in various ways. So we should ask, what have been the efforts to weaken those policies favorable to agri-industrial systems? Through what alliances, collective capacities, and strategies? And then the final mini point is about collective learning. How can such efforts learn from each other across places for designing policies that can facilitate an agroecological transition? Fini.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much for bringing new questions even in this discussion. Lots of things to see, lots of things to take stock of and take stock of. And now, please, the floor. Thank you very much. And now, please, the floor is to Sébastien Treyer. Sébastien is Executive Director of IFPRI. Please, the floor is yours.
Merci, Vincent, and thanks to the organizers. Yes, duly noted, Vincent. I'm really pleased that the name of the session is about what works and what doesn't work, because one of the first knowledge gaps that I wanted to put to draw the attention upon is the issue of the knowledge on the failures, on the policies that tried to implement the agroecological transition and that did not succeed, because it's not completely new that we tried to do that. And I think there is a lot of knowledge that we need to have in terms of public policy evaluation, and the TAFS project can go in that direction. What I want you to put into the discussion is the idea that we, of course, need to look at scaling up agroecological innovations. But one of the reasons why they don't scale up is also because there is a socio-technical lock-in. And so we need to find policies that are able to unlock transition, meaning that you have the meaning of the socio-technical regime in science and technology studies is to say that there is a systemic lock-in between existing norms and standards, performance criteria, power relations, the asymmetries in the access to symbolic, financial, or political resources. And this is all explaining why it's complicated to scale up interesting niche innovations like agroecology. And so the policies to unlock is a way to look at the mix of policy instruments that are presented in the policy paper, but really to look at how to mobilize in different situations the strategic mix of policy instruments to unlock the transition. And I think that's extremely important. In some regard, I think a lot of the things that have been said about participation are also key, because participation can be a way to challenge the incumbent regime or the way that the policies are organized beforehand. And so the conditions to enable systemic unlocking are extremely important. I just want to use two examples. The first one is an example to say policies can actually be the problem. And I think Les alluded to that. Of course, being a European, I think of the common agricultural policy. Reforming and repurposing existing policies is extremely important, beyond and more important than just adding new policy instruments. So in that regard, I think it's very important to see how the political economy of reform is really complicated. We see that in Europe at any 7 years, when we try to reform the common agricultural policy and we don't succeed in making it a policy for transition. And this is something that has been addressed in the report that I participated to for the European SCAR on resilience and transformation. But beware that this could be the same for India and the policy on access to nitrogen fertilizer. So it's not just a European issue. The other example is the reduction in pesticides. In France, we've been trying to reduce by half the use of pesticides, and it was supposed to function between 2008 and 2018, not just being more efficient or substitute, but really redesign the systems. And the redesign part is what has been extremely complicated, because it bumped into the challenge of rediversifying production regions that were specializing. And so the whole question that is central in the framework that you've been presenting on economic diversification is really one of the key issues, because we need to find the policies that are the drivers of specialization and how to develop policies that are different, or to change those existing policies for different policies. And again, this is about something that exists a lot in Europe, but it's also the fact that many of the policies developed in southern countries, in emerging or least developed countries, are about, have a vision of specialization, because that goes with economies of scale rather than economies of scope, and the whole software needs to be changed. I could say the same of a project that I saw in Mali, while AVSF tries to develop agricultural models that are not dependent on pesticides and antibiotics, while the policy of the government goes towards more input-intensive agriculture. So how do you deal with the contradiction in policy, the coherence in policies, and how do you deal with both of them? My last point, I hope I'm in time, Vincent, is the fact that we also need to be aware of the political nature of knowledge itself. As I said, in the concepts of socio-technical lock-in, and I think I'm one of the readings that was really enlightening to me was from Les Levidov, so I'm really happy to be in the panel with Les, is about the fact that there is actually a battle of ideas in the field of narratives and visions of the future, but there are different layers of asymmetries on the strategic use of knowledge between the statu quo players, the incumbents in a specific regime, and those who are the agents of change and transformation, for instance, the niche innovations or agroecological innovation. The burden of proof is very often asymmetrical. Agroecology is supposed to prove that it's going to be contributing to food and nutrition security in 2050, which is not asked the same way for conventional agriculture, or the way to model it is easier for the incumbents than for the newcomers, which is something that is quite common in science and technology studies. So there is a way where we could look at the issue of how to equip counter expertise to make the burden of proof more equal. But we also need to look not just at counter expertise, but also at the issue of imaginaries and narratives that are not always rationally discussed and that are framing a lot the conversation that we have. And I think that also participates to the unlocking. Thank you very much, Vincent.
Thank you, Sébastien, and for this perspective, complementary. And then the last speaker for this reactions panel, what works less well, Natalia Estrada Carmona, who is associate scientist and landscape ecologist of the Multifunctional Landscapes Initiative at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT. So Natalia, you have 4 minutes before we go to the question from the audience, if we have time.
Okay, thank you. So I see that the presentation is being shared, and I will just start with what, from my experience, I think it needs to be done. So can you pass to the next slide, please? And one key point is that policies needs to recognize and work more at the landscape level. Agriculture is traditionally planned and targeted at the field or farm level. However, the cumulative impact of unsustainable farm management is detected and perceived at landscape level as ecosystem disservices or food deserts. There are already many landscape practitioners implementing integrated landscape approaches for achieving outcomes on conservation, sustainable production, human well-being, and governance. And some of the integrated landscape, if not all, in Latin America, identify having policies that enable and legitimize working at landscape level, facilitate them engaging the multiple stakeholders and also targeting interventions at the landscape level for all these different outcomes. So that middle scale between too small farm and too large, the country needs to be more present in policies. Now, next slide, please. Let me reinforce from my point of view, I think it's very important to recognize that there's not only one policy, one action, or one intervention that will change everything. What it requires is multiple concerted efforts and a mix of policies, mechanisms that fit the social, ecological, political context and the different starting points of each landscape and country. Hence, I want to focus next in the traits that enabling policies should have based on the evidence, and some of them you already heard about. So the first one is, of course, creating units or programs in organizations or legislations or policies that specifically recognize and value agroecology and systems approach. Even if there are not specific activities, this is an enabling factor that will create momentum and will open the door to other ways of producing, distributing, and consuming food, fibers, and bioenergy, like we saw in Senegal, in France, and Brazil. And that will bring as well the minds, the skills, and the people that is needed to translate those big goals into tangible actions on the ground. The next point is engage. We know that policies fostering and opening and requiring the engagement of all stakeholders from civil society, public and private sector, from the inception or the design, during the implementation and up to evaluation is critical for the long term of any effort making our food systems more sustainable. We need to break the silo planning and stop the top down. People need to be part of the creation of the new policies. Then diversify. I hope diversity is the concept that guides the new decade that we are entering. We see it in investment portfolios, and we need to apply more this rule for sustainable food systems. Diversified sources of investment, diversified interventions, and the multiple spatial, farm, landscape, country, and at different temporal scales, 2 year, 5 year, 10 years, 15 years, and also across different sectors, health, conservation, education, natural resources, sustainable production. Then we also need to connect. We need to engage and diversify. Engaging and diversifying requires an increased connectivity across sectors, stakeholders, scales, and types of knowledge, scientific and local and traditional. More evidence shows that when we put our minds and our efforts together, and we heard in the different examples, in these different legitimized forms of social organization and knowledge interchange facilitates working towards a shared and common vision, faster and better. So increasing this connectivity and cross-pollination requires time, effort, and support. Hence the importance of investing on what is the glue that will keep everything together. So policies need to recognize this effort and the time that this will require. Then mediate. We cannot underestimate the importance of having trained people with the social, people, and social and people skills for mediating power imbalances, or even solving conflict between stakeholders with different or contrasting interests. Mediation is key for an orchestrated action in moving forward. And then empower, work and equip a value and position small and medium farm holders, which are often out of policies or less touched by current policies, as we see in Europe or we see in the US. Don't underestimate the power and motivation that farmers have for sharing experiences, co-learning, and testing new ways of producing. They are the engines of change and will continue to be after the project is finished. And then the two last points, which are very critical for learning from failures, as was pointed before, is monitoring is critical to measure progress. Despite its importance, we need to get better, particularly on indicators that matter to people, like we saw in the India case of happiness. And of course, it will require looking beyond calories and yields, and also it will require looking at multiple spatial and temporal scales, like we saw what we hear from Bernard in France. And finally, analyze. Very rarely we will make progress on all the desired fronts at the pace that we want on nutrition, human well-being, natural resources, and production. Hence the importance of establishing adaptive management or policies that facilitate that to identify what is going well, what is missing, and assign the causality between policy, intervention, and outcomes, so we can get better on moving on creating the policies that will enable the agroecological transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia, for pointing to all the dimensions that even complexify this problem of making comprehensive policies, as also we try to depict in the paper in using typologies to start with. Now, many good presentations, many good ideas. Let's have the panelists rest just for 1 minute, because we're going to ask the audience, so the 400 participants in the room, to answer 2 simple questions by polling. So this is in Zoom. You will have 2 questions that require your opinion or your perspective. Simple questions. So Fabio, can we have the poll, please? And poll
yes,
number one.
I'm gonna launch it, but apparently we have all 4 questions together. So
okay. Let's go through the 4. Okay, let's go to the 2 first question then.
Okay.
We'll see then.
Okay.
Okay, so okay. So we need to go through the 4 questions. I cannot break into.
Unfortunately not, sorry.
Okay, so we will go then to the 4 questions. So it will take a little bit more time, but it's not a big deal, because this we will have done it after. Anyway, the first question is whether, on your opinion, to scale up agroecology, the main effort should be on technical solution from farm to fork, or enabling policies for producers to consumers. Fabio, do I need to run through all the questions? Because the first time we're doing it like that. So
yes, I think it's better if you run through the questions, because people are answering already questions which you haven't yet spoken.
So you need to scroll down your polling window. The question number 2 is, according to you, what is the primary reason inhibiting more favorable national policies in support of agroecology transition? Is it 1, lack of evidence on the benefits of agroecology principles and practices; 2, lack of understanding of which policies are most effective and feasible to implement; 3, political caution in moving away from current practices; or 4, vested interest advocating against change? There is only one main reason here you can choose. Question number 3. For agroecological transition, given the 13 principles of the HLP report, in your context, what nature of policy would in general work best? I'm referring here to a slide that presented by Frank and Paulo. Is it sermons, persuasion, sensitization? Is it carrots and incentives like taxes, subsidies? Or is it 3, sticks, command and control, regulations, and possibly also fines? Sermons, carrots, or sticks in your context? And the last one, which also refers to the typology used in the background document of the different policies. According to you, where do we need more effort from science and research to feed policy gaps? Is it producer-oriented policies? Is it consumer-oriented policies? Are we talking about market and food environment-oriented policies, macro and trade-oriented policies, or comprehensive cross-cutting policies? Only one choice in each question. So I'm going to leave you 1 minute to close the vote, and then we'll move on to the discussion. Thirty seconds. Fabio, you may tell us how it's going. Because the panelists, we cannot vote. It's only the attendance, the public.
Yes. Votings are still ongoing. People are still making their mind. So we give them another 10 seconds.
Yeah, let's.
Okay, so I'm going to close the poll in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's over.
Okay, we're seeing the results. So you can, I guess, scroll down the window just like I can. It's not fully displaying. Obviously, the importance of policies, the importance of policies for transformation, the importance of looking at the political economy and at interest against change, the importance of incentives. So, and I guess as well then the question about the economics aspects and costs and benefits. And then looking at not only just one part of the value chains or the food system, but at comprehensive cross-cutting policies for agroecology, but also agroecology embedded in other policies, as was expressed in the case of Brazil, for instance. Okay, thanks very much for the rich answer. It's a good material. We'll also put that in our workshop report. Now there is a decision to make, because we are 10 minutes behind what should be the start of the next phase. And we have a lot of questions. Well, 44 questions has been answered, but 29 are still open. I think that what we could do, I propose we invite all the participants to keep up either adding question on the Q&A or voting on the question. You can put a thumb up if you like the question, and we will use all of that to have a discussion after the next panel. Hopefully, the next panel should last 20 minutes, and this should give us a little bit of time to wrap up. So I would like to give the floor to our esteemed panelists to look at or give their perspective at knowledge and implementation gaps in the area of agroecological policies. And we wanted to have a large multi-stakeholder panel bring different viewpoints. And the first in line, delighted to call on Emma Siliprandi from FAO. Emma, the floor is yours. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Vincent. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So, yeah, as you know, FAO is supporting the scaling up of agroecological experiences since 2018, after the second International Symposium on Agroecology to Achieve the SDGs, when the Scaling Up Agroecology Initiative was launched. Based on the work FAO and partners have been doing since that, I would like to make some comments on the policy science gap identified in the previous discussions and the implementation of policies to enhance agroecology on the field. I want to highlight two main issues. First one, the lack of system thinking in the decision-making arenas, and therefore lack of coordination mechanisms among policies. And on the other hand, the difficulties on generating data in a multidimensional way to be used by decision makers. And I would like also to quickly present some insights based on the work that we have been following up in different countries and regions on how to overcome these challenges. We know that decision makers not always are convinced about the benefits of agroecological approaches to tackle all the challenges food systems face. Some questions are frequently raised, especially about the capacity of agroecological practices to maintain the productivity level of the agroecosystems or guarantee the family's income, for instance. The policy science gap is often attributed to lack of harmonized and consistent data at national, regional, or global levels, but also to the difficulties faced by governments to set integrated policies based on holistic thinking We think that this is really very important. As we know, it is common that different ministries work in isolation from each other and don't consider the existing relationship among global challenges, such as hunger, malnutrition, climate change, biodiversity loss, and how those issues are linked to equity, justice, employment, gender, youth, along with environmental sustainability, of course. We have to show them how agroecological approaches can represent an opportunity to rethink and redesign food and agricultural systems under a sustainability lens. As was already said by several speakers in these discussions, when we have seen public policies succeed in bringing agroecology to scale, when coupled with target investments, and when they adapt their national research and rural advisory services, when they build upon social capital, engaging existing consolidated grassroots groups and organizations who are fundamental in knowledge sharing, when coupled with social protection policies and specific access to markets, as well as certification and procurement schemes in a participatory way, when implemented from smaller to bigger scales, from municipality to territorial and national levels, and when anchored in national strategies and mainstreamed through an interministerial coordination. This is really important. I would like to quickly mention two products that FAO developed with partners under the Scaling Up Agroecology initiative to support countries to overcome these challenges. The first one is the 10 elements of agroecology that was mentioned before by other speakers. And the second one is the tool for agroecology performance evaluation called TAPE. The 10 elements of agroecology is an analytical framework to guide the design of differentiated paths for agriculture and food systems transformation. As an analytical tool, the 10 elements aim to help countries to operationalize agroecology and serve as a voluntary guide for policymakers, practitioners, stakeholders in planning, managing, evaluating key entry points to initiate or join agroecological transitions. The tool for agroecology performance evaluation, TAPE, was launched in 2019 with the objective of produce global and harmonized evidence on the multidimensional performance of agroecology, based on the 10 elements that I just mentioned. Currently, TAPE is being used in 30 countries across many different geographic regions, territories, and production systems to validate its methodological choices and to populate the global database on the multidimensional impact of agroecology. Just to give you one example.
Thank you. No, I don't think we have time for that because,
for example, because
it's already 6 minutes. It was 4. I need to give the time to others to speak. Otherwise, but please, the examples please conclude and please conclude, and the examples can be given in the Q&A or offline. Please, thank you.
Perfect. To summarize, I am sure that there are already good experiences on integrated policies, and there are also analytic tools available which can be used to overcome the policy science gaps identified on the implementation of the agroecological policies. So I thank you very much for the time, and I hope that we can discuss further later. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, and sorry for being a bit hard in time management. I forgot to say that you are the FAO lead focal point for the Scaling Up Agroecology initiative. That's a very important initiative that the TPP, of course, will link up with, as FAO is also a member of the TPP. Let me give the floor to Paulo Petersen, who is in Brazil, the executive coordinator of ASPTA, Agricultura Familiar e Agroecologia. Paulo, the floor is yours. Again,
Thank
4
you.
minutes, and I'll ring the bell at 3.
Thank you, Vincent. Due the short time, I selected just one point to stress in the debate. One of the main challenges we face refers to the need to develop and institutionalize a new conceptual framework and new metrics to plan, monitor, and evaluate public action in direction of transformation based on agroecological principles. This is not an easy challenge to overcome. From the intellectual point of view, we are talking about a paradigmatic shift, not just a small adaptation in a dominant social technical regime. So we are talking about the paradigm, the dominant paradigm builds a very coherent synergy among neoclassical economics and diffusionism, technological diffusionism, and green revolution techniques. So to shift this way of thinking that is based off the idea of universalizing, on homogenizing, to describe, categorize, and plan the rural and agricultural development trajectories. So we need to build a new framework to exactly to recognize alternative possibilities of developments, because this the framework, the dominant framework, the main effect is the effect of invisibilization and delegitimation of these alternative trajectories. And this we have a huge social experience around the world in agroecology, but it's absolutely invisible if we can use the dominant lens to interpret the heterogeneity of rural world. So the main force of agroecological transformation is in place, but we have a huge paradox, the omnipresence and invisibilization. We need to build new lens to interpret this social practice, because these social practices are based on other economies, other way to produce and share knowledge, other ways to understand the developments. So we need not only public policy, a redistribution public policy, we need also new recognition policies. We need to recognize the rural heterogeneity based on the principles of agroecology, and the principles of agroecology are in place. This is very important. This practice, which so far are interpreted as backwards and antiquated, would be reframed as seeds and sprouts of the agroecological transition. So, to finish, this puts the need a new balance between state and civil society and the territorial approach as the main locus of governance of food systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulo. Next speaker out of the 5, Ernest Aubé, who is the head of the Agriculture Division at the ECOWAS Commission. So, Ernest, Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
4 minutes.
Okay, thanks. I would go straight away to my discussion. A number of speakers have touched on the benefits of EOA to the African continent in terms of food security, health, environment, and economic livelihoods. What is basically missing is the absence of agroecological policies in our member states. And because of this absence, it is a setback for the development of the agroecological sector. A good number of the member states in the African Union, in ECOWAS, have not got comprehensive or holistic agroecological policies. But however, the good news is that the continent is working on addressing these gaps. For example, at the continental level, we have the Ecological Organic Agriculture Initiative, which is being led by the African Union Commission and being powered by and being implemented by BioVision. We also have the ECOWAS Commission, which is implementing a series of organic agricultural programs in the 15 member states. Now, in terms of policy, ecological agricultural policies have to be at the center of both the regional and national agricultural investment plans. This is very critical. Mainstreaming ecological agriculture is the way to go, and we must do a lot of advocacy to encourage African governments to take that route. Also, agroecological policies should adopt a system-wide approach whereby we bring in all the best practices from within the continent of Africa and beyond. And this should be participatory in nature by involving all the critical stakeholders in the value chain in both the policy formulation, planning, and execution. Now, the key concerns of any agroecological policy should be to see how best to increase production and productivity and to promote environmental sustainability. Promotion of systems is critical at this time in the development of the African continent in general and the ECOWAS region in particular. We must make the right investments, we must build capacities, we must create awareness about the importance and opportunities in ecological agriculture, and we must drive attitudinal change from the policymakers right down to the consumers. We also need to strengthen ecological resistance. We must try to strengthen ecological resilience to address climate change and environmental degradation. And we must learn from other parts of the world where agroecological practices have been implemented for a very, very long time. In our own way, we must also promote local knowledge management, because some of our farmers are already practicing agroecological systems. So this would be my submission. I have a long presentation, which can thank you very much.
We can thank you very much, Ernest, and yes, there'll be we'll give the means to give access to all the audience about the rich material. Thanks for pointing to what's going on, but also what needs to be going on moving forward in West Africa in particular. And now I'm calling, so War, thanks to be with us today. I'm calling Guy Font on the floor. Guy Font is Senior Policy Officer at the European Commission, the DG of International Partnerships. So Guy, 4 minutes before, last but not least, we give the floor to Maya Tekove from BMZ. Guy, the floor is yours. If you're hearing me.
Vous m'entendez?
Oui, parfait.
Voilà, désolé. Oui, donc je vais parler d'un point de vue d'un...
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I'd like to speak from the perspective of a founder, as well as from the perspective of an organization setting policies. I will also share some of the policies of the European Union. We are focusing on the Green Deal, and there is a strategy that is farm to fork. That policy is the European policy, but it's also open to beyond the borders of Europe. So it gives way to international partnership. We can have discussions between the European Union and the African Union. These discussions also happen at the UNFSS, and we even have discussions at the national level. There is currently a budget exercise that we are running at the European Union for 2021-2027. That would help to shape new policies and new investments so far as agroecology is concerned. Agroecology, I dare to say, is one of the policies that we have in many of our documents. It is not devoid of discussions that seek to implement agroecology in many of the policies in various, if not all, the European Union member states. We can see that many countries are already in favor of agroecology, and some are still a little bit reluctant. We also have discussions on agroecology at the international level. For instance, we can see the summit on food systems. We can see that people talk a lot about the type of food production systems. We have discussions, as I said, with African partners such as the African Union. Think also of the FARA, the Forum for Agricultural Research in Africa, and we discuss the type of partnership that we can have. There are discussions, since some of the partners are in favor of inputs or chemical inputs, whereas others are more for bio and organic agriculture. As we also said, we have discussions with various ministries. We can see that AGRA, for instance, is one of our partners. We have discussion with Environment Directorate and various directorates at the European Union. We have a report from various NGOs that mention limited funding in agroecology in the past. Now, nowadays, we need to have more investments, not in investments and in research, which is one thing we do through the DESIRA project. We also need to invest in funding. We invest in some various seeds and value chains to promote agroecology. For us, the UNFFS is an important summit for agroecology, and we are very hopeful that many countries will join a coalition to support agroecology. That will be important in promoting positions in favor of agroecology. In conclusion, I would like to say that we need to have an alignment among policies. It is important to have certain coherence between sector policies and national policies. That alignment can happen only if political leaders have a clear-cut vision of what they want to achieve and the type of food systems that need to be set. We may have some short-term actions, but what is more important is to have a long-term vision. We need to have actors that will raise the awareness, and it is something that we see during the UNFSS. Usually, it is the civil society that raises their voice to promote agroecology. So, all of that is to say that policies in favor of agroecology are gradually being heard, but we still need to make more efforts to put agroecology at the heart of development. It is certainly one of the things that we need to do to mainstream agroecology in all our development policies. Thank you for your kind
Merci
attention.
Guy, et merci pour la perspective de la Commission européenne en soutien notamment aussi à la TPP et aux trajectoires de nombreux pays dans le monde. Avant de passer à une phase de questions, c'est très, très impressionnant le nombre de questions que l'on a.
It's quite impressive to see the number of questions.
Last segment of question and answers. Let me give last but not least the floor to Maria Tekulve, who is Deputy Head of Division and Local and Focal Point at BMZ for Rural Development and Agroecology. Maria, we are delighted to have you with us. So please give us your perspective and then we'll come up with the wrapping discussion.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. I'm delighted to be on this panel. So the pleasure and honor is on my side. And it's hard for me now, after having listened to all these experts and very interesting contributions, really, it's hard for me to add anything new. So I will really try, and I have a few points to make only. But or for me, often it's a matter of underlining now what others said. So there is this global momentum, there is this window of opportunity. And I think I would even go a bit further, not only let's use it, that is what we are trying to do so. I perceive globally a turning point, and that is really for me, not only for me personally, I think that is a very positive signal, though there is a long way to go, but I perceive a turning point, and that is a turning point not only when we look at the discussions among us, but mindsets, and maybe that was not so much debated today, but I perceive a change in mindsets, and that is, I think, most important. What I can report from Germany is that maybe that is of interest for some of you. We are talking about policies and politicians. And here in Germany, in June 2019, the German Bundestag adopted a resolution comprising 11 separate requests aimed at supporting agroecology in German development cooperation, so in the global south mainly. But this resolution from the highest level, the German Bundestag, was quite effective, and it really was a considerable stimulus to further increase of our engagement. So the message maybe would be that if you want to change something, and we're talking about policies here, and the seminar is on policies, certainly you need to work and inform and convince your parliamentarians and the also local and regional politicians. What I find quite interesting is, and that is very, very recent, we have a quite lively and interesting debate going on the future of agriculture and rural life in Germany. Now I think it has gone. I'm not sure whether you still hear me. I don't see you anymore.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I don't see you anymore. However, so we have this debate also going on at present about agriculture and rural life in Germany. And the Ministry of Agriculture has set in place a kind of high-level panel or commission, and this commission has worked out a vision for agriculture in Germany. It's still ongoing, the report is there, but the debate, it's there. And so I hope something is going to happen. Since there's not much time today, I just want to mention and to underline that I think, and I'm very glad that we look more at landscape approaches and holistic approaches, because in my perception for many, many years, it was too much on one sector and on production. And I'm very glad that we now also even include local values and traditions again. One point I want to stress before I already finish then, I think we have done much very valuable and relevant analysis and work on ecological aspects and environmental aspects. We are only, in what I perceive as, we have only started to work on economics and markets. So I really, I was very glad to see in the CFS recommendations and in other publications suggestions on true cost accounting, true cost externalities, and so on. And this is a start. And I think, and I propose to work more on economics and markets, because if we want to convince farmers, regional politicians, governments, the private market, we have to come up and to convince and to provide evidence that the new systems work for everybody. And I think we have these instruments with true cost accounting now. We have it in our hands, and the first step for me would be to inform politicians and also the general public, because many simply don't know. And we are at the start of this process. Okay, a few more words. I'm about to close already. Certainly, and this is really our minister's position, we have to look not only, certainly not global south, but also the global north. Many speakers, also my colleague from the European Union, say this, but also from France. So we really have, we also have to work here and take over responsibility in the global north. Last word. We need a new understanding of what modern means. And Africa now has the chance, for instance, Africa, but also India or others, they are in the process of defining a new type of agriculture, rural development, and food systems. And I was listening to Senegal, and it was really very interesting. And who was it? Salion also. Thank you very much for your presentation. And when it comes to new modern systems, maybe Senegal also could be a front runner. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria, for these very concrete points. I would very much agree with many of these, especially the need for looking at economics, market, true costs, and how can that help the transition, and not be blind of that, but fully embracing the possibilities, but also be aware of the constraints, exactly to address the barriers. Many things have been said today. Wow, it's incredibly rich. They've been First, a presentation on this background document that is for our draft, that is for comment. Etienne will say a few words about how to do that and how to enrich it further, because this is not research that is done in labs or on our desks. It's research that needs to come from the experience of countries, what they've put in place, what has worked less well, and how to move forward. It's scaling up, scaling out, but it's scaling from within with new coalitions. And we don't have the time for too many questions, but I would like to challenge a little bit based on what our scientists have said in the first panel and what the stakeholders from national level and international level have said in the second panel, whether how to challenge our TPP colleagues in charge of this policy work stream, whether what do they think needs to be done in order to facilitate the scaling of these policies across different contexts? What would be the role of the TPP? We've seen so many successful experiences in so many different contexts. What can the TPP bring to that? And what is the plan going forward? So if someone from the TPP would like to say a few words about this, either Etienne or Fergus or Frank or Paulo, in 1 minute, a bit of a challenging question to some of you. The TPP is transformative. It's not just to put good papers in place, but perhaps not just leave them on the shelves. Yes, Fergus, please.
Yeah, no, I can say something. So I think, we've identified clearly within the TPP that to be transformative, it isn't good enough just to do analysis. You have to actually address not only knowledge gaps, but also implementation gaps. And, the paper presents clear notions of where there are implementation gaps. For example, in relation to horizontal integration and vertical integration in relation to scale. So there are virtually no policy structures at local, landscape, or territorial scales at which ecosystem services are first manifest and can be managed. And so unless you tackle putting the social capital and the policy structures at that scale, it's very difficult to get implement the policies and connect national commitments to action on the ground. And so working practically on how to do that in different circumstances is what the TPP is all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Fergus. And this is, I guess, a plea to connect to the TPP as well in order to bring that analysis and change. And without further ado, we're running 1 minute over time. So I thank everybody who participated, but it's not finished. I will give the floor to Etienne Ainzelin, who I recall is the advisor to the president of CIRAD, to close this workshop and indicate us what's going ahead, what are the next steps, how to engage. Etienne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vincent. And thank you, all of you, panelists and participants, for this incredible workshop and event. Most of the interaction has been made through the chat and through the Q&A section. So we plan to have some audience interaction online, but it was not possible. I just wanted to mention before to close this event that this is a first step of interaction, and the main objective of this workshop was to share ideas about interaction between science and policy and develop an analytical framework on policy. So one of the questions we're gonna send to you, to all participants by mail, is a template to react on this background paper, adding references, adding example of policy, failure, success in local or national or international settings, so we can enrich the paper and develop a more complete framework. So that's the first point. This is very important. The second point is that you can react to this message that is going to be sent to all participants proposing to partners with the TPP somehow, knowing that the TPP is a very small structure. It's a coalition of willing. It's not a funder. It's not a research institution. It's just a coalition starting to gather momentum in this. So, and I remind the two main focus: knowledge gaps, implementation gaps. And so at this point we are opening this partnership to people. You will be informed of that. So please put your names ahead and join the effort with the TPP site. And so with that, I will just say my thanks to everybody for this interaction. It's just an incredible momentum now, and we are ready to play our part. So over to you, Vincent, just to say we're going closing down and see you soon.
Thank you very much, Etienne. Thank you very much to all our panelists for their time, for also the answers already given to the questions in the Q&A. And we will keep in touch by email, and we hopefully have everybody engaged, present today engaged, and the associations with you engaged in this work stream. Fabio and the tech team, also a big bravo for the organization of this webinar, virtual all across the globe. It worked very well, I guess, for everybody.
Yep. Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody who joined us.